Thanks for tuning in once again here over at Ourlads, the Ourlads football YouTube channel. As we're talking, that's right, you see it right there. Well, it's behind the screen, but you get the deal. And that is, well, how can you not know what that logo represents? It's
Yeah.
Reese's. It's the
That's an easy
Senior
one.
Bowl. It's Dave Syvertsen reporting live from Mobile. How's it going down there, Dave?
Great. I'm glad the weather held up. I fell victim to looking at the weather forecast last week, and I saw some potential rain midweek this week. And if you know anything about how they operate practice here, it can get pretty dicey. You might not even get any access to a practice if it's raining and they have to move indoors. So it ended up being a beautiful, very comfortable football weather day. Especially much warmer than it is in New Jersey right now, my hometown. So it was a comfortable 55, 60 degrees, a little bit of sun here and there, and it was great football weather.
Well, we're going to hear from you for the next several days. We weren't, of course, on yesterday, day one, because there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. But this is when they get the opportunity to go out and practice. And they're going to be doing that for the next several days. They'll have the game on Saturday. You're going to be doing reports for the next several days. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these reports. But quarterbacks, something that we're going to talk about tomorrow, even though obviously quarterbacks were out there. But this was a really good day for you to take a look at the trenches. Obviously, you've got the defensive line, offensive line matchups. That's always a favorite for scouts. And I'm sure you think nonetheless any different. So what did you think? Who stuck out today in the battle of the trenches on the offense and defensive lines?
Yeah, so my favorite part about yesterday is we get these official measurements. We have official measurements from last spring, and there's other avenues to get some real measurements on these guys leading up to, but this is the first time you get all that objective height, weight, arm length, hand size, wingspan. And again, you're not going to move a guy up or down a lot based on those alone, but it does help kind of complete painting this picture. And
Absolutely.
now to watch them in person. Now you watch these guys in person in combination with that objective information. This is where objective, subjective really comes together. And that's what scouting is. And so it was just interesting to get some of these weigh-in numbers, but the defensive line class, we've talked about it already. We'll talk about it again. It is such an incredibly strong group, D tackles and on the end. And I put a tweet out there. It's like, hey, guys, let's pray for the offensive line this week because the amount of NFL talent, I'm talking day one, day two talent on the Senior Bowl roster just up front alone is tenfold of what we saw last year. Last year, we saw a lot of good offensive line talent. It's been completely turned around this year. Walter Nolan, defensive tackle from Mississippi, 6'3", 293, 33-inch arms. Those are good measurements for that guy because he is undersized, but sometimes he looks a little more undersized than he is because he's so fast. I mean, this guy is lightning quick, and the notes I kept on writing down on him were redirect, meaning he changes direction once he notices where the ball's going, where he needs to get to. He can get from point A to point B and pivot, change direction like a 230-pound linebacker. And that's the name that really came in and saying, hey, this might be the highest draft pick here at the Senior Bowl. It might be Walter Nolan, and he is every bit of a top 15 pick right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was taking a look because I think it's important to take a look at some other, like how does and I'm talking about CBS Sportsline, NFL.com, some of the really big sites that follow the draft, and just how do they think? We just put out our first mock draft. We have the link in the description of this video the other day with John Cooper. And a lot of it has to do with representing those first 32, the rankings that also came out here on the site. But it was interesting because Walter Nolan and a lot of what I see outside of Ourlads, a little bit further down. Ourlads seems to hold Walter Nolan in a little bit higher regards coming into this week than most of the rest of the mock drafts I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think defensive line value, and you could just see the contracts in the NFL. I mean, the NFL wants these guys. You need quick pressure in the NFL now. Everyone's getting the ball out quicker than ever. And it's just hard for an end to make an impact on the game the way they used to because of how fast they get the ball out. Now, the quickest route, point A to point B, is a straight line, and that's where D tackles line up. That's where Walter Nolan will line up. And he's a guy that I think is going to, at the end of the day, be the top pass rushing defensive tackle in this class. And because of the increased value of that spot, that role in the NFL, you're talking about a top 15 projection. But there's another guy that his redirect was just as good, and I kind of like his body more in terms of being a run defender. And this is Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee, 6'2", 295, the biggest hands here. And yes, it does matter. Over 11-inch hands. Nobody else is in that tier. He's there by himself. 33.5-inch arms. I mean, he has a little bit more size, but his body type is what you would expect from a defensive tackle. He's a lot thicker. He's built much lower to the ground. And if you can remember back to watching Byron Murphy play football last year at Texas, this past season at the with the Seattle Seahawks, a first-round pick, that ability to play low, put your knee on the ground, absorb space, absorb blockers, be a run defender, stout run defender, but also rush the passer when you need to rush the passer. I thought he was the best in the one-on-ones this afternoon, because of the combination of quickness, redirect, and power. He has it all. And Nolan, he doesn't have as much sheer power as Lott does from Tennessee.
Okay, so those were two of the interior guys that stuck out. Before we go to edge and then flip over to the offensive line, were there any other interior guys that stuck out?
I mean, Deion
and by
Walker,
the way, I have to ask you. I must ask you. Sorry for interrupting, because I must ask you. This is a controversial player on our video boards, of course, and that's because John Cooper did a video on Deion Walker a while back before the season began. Loved him, a lot to like about him. And then all of a sudden, a couple of months later, John starts to wonder, well, I don't know about this. He's not having a good season. I'm not sure what's going on there. And so there's some mixed messages that then were going on in the comment section about what's going on with Walker. So you've got an opportunity to see him for the first time?
Yeah, that's like literally who I was just about to bring up. It's Deion Walker, measured in at over 6'7", 340 pounds, 34.5-inch arms. So I have a database of measurements of draft picks, and he's by himself. I mean, we've seen guys that are 6'8", 6'9", but they're tackles, they're offensive linemen. We've seen DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead and Calais Campbell, guys that stand over 6'7", but they weigh around 300, 305 when they came out. This guy is 340 pounds. I mean, you just look at him, you're kind of like, I've never seen this before. And that stands out. When you scout a lot of football players and you see something for the first time, you get excited. And then you watch him move. I mean, John, this is a quick-footed guy. He can get his feet off the ground and move. He can change direction. He can close. But as we saw at Kentucky this past year, and this was the same exact case today, very inconsistent snap to snap, not even week to week in this season, snap to snap. There's plays where he looks like Tarzan, plays where he looks like Jane, where he just gets stalled out. That pad level, I asked a specialist today that I sat with watching practice, and I asked him, I was like, can you be too tall to play football on the inside?
Sure.
And it's a thing, because pad level is huge. And so he got stalled out a lot in these one-on-ones, but I watched him. I actually think he's a better football player in game situations as a rotational guy. You have him come in, he's got fresh legs, and he's going to make things happen. And that to some teams is enough to say, hey, you're our number 3 defensive tackle. We're going to rotate you in. Hopefully we get a couple of splash plays from you. But I don't see him as a guy that could be an every down player.
And you didn't notice whether or not sometimes when there's that much inconsistency, it could be one of two things. It could be conditioning. It could just be mental. Did you notice any of that? Or was there sort of like what you had just alluded to, that, hey, 6'7", defensive tackles, 340 pounds, it's a lot working against him.
Yeah, it is tough. I did see on game day, he plays a lot. He plays a lot of snaps at Kentucky. It was among the most in the SEC, especially in 2023. But he does not look well conditioned. But it's hard to measure that at the Senior Bowl, because these guys only play a few plays at a time. Then they rotate all new bodies in. The one-on-ones, you have 3 minutes between your reps. I mean, it's hard to really. I just think it's a lack of attention to detail and his body type, and he's a very top-heavy guy. You look at where he carries a lot of weight; it's above the waist. It looks kind of sloppy. His lower body is very oddly small. Like, we talk about in scouting, learn from Dan Shanka, like, does the guy fill out his pants, right? Like, does he have a big butt? Does he have big hips? Does he have big thighs, right? He doesn't, for a guy that's 340 pounds. So I just think he's just a weird player, and I think a defensive line coach is going to want to work with him. I think there's going to be several that want to work with him.
Okay. How about on the edge? Give us some edge guys because, hey, one of them that's there is another name that everybody wants to know about this week, and that's Mike Green because of the fact that you're talking about a highly productive edge rusher, led the nation in sacks. Actually, both players that were 1-2 in sacks. The kid from BC is a kid that I just love on tape. I was really interested to find out what kind of a week he has. But hey, some people say, well, you're playing in the ACC, or for Marshall, oh, you're playing in the mid majors. So I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to take a look at both of those guys a lot today. If you have any reports on them or any other players that stuck out on the edge.
Both, Mike Green, he weighed in at 250 pounds, a little bit bigger than I thought. He doesn't look 250 on tape, but he doesn't have long arms, and he doesn't have a big wide wingspan. So you're not looking at a guy that's probably going to add a lot of weight at the next level. I personally don't view him as a first round prospect. That's kind of like a hot, trendy name right now. I think he's more of a day 2 prospect that gives you a lot of upside. But like you said, and I've watched all his snaps, all of his pressures on tape, every single one of them. I can count on one hand how many times he's beat a tackle that's going to be in the NFL someday. I mean, when you play at that, and you don't want to hold him against him too much, but he did dominate against lower level of competition, but there wasn't a ton that I saw against quality opponents. And today he's playing against guys that will inevitably be in the NFL a year from now. And he did not stand out. He didn't play poorly, but he did not stand out. The guy that did stand out is who you mentioned. And I still have to learn this name, but it's Donovan Ezeruku from Boston College. Yeah. 6'2", really long, really low to the ground. I mean, this is, to me, like, sometimes this is the prototype that I personally like from a third down edge rusher. He's 6'2", so he's a little on the short side, but he bends exceptionally well, and he's got 34.5-inch arms. That's among the longest of any player in Mobile this weekend. It's just a very unique body type. And if you know how to use your hands and arms and initiate contact with your blocker, with his quickness, that he's a dangerous edge rusher. I would actually put him in round 1 before I put Mike Green there.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when I looked at the first, not just, of course, I was looking over some mocks, and then when your mock came out and didn't see him in the first round, I was a little bit surprised, but I understood it. That's why I figured this week was going to be the big week for him to determine whether or not he could get into that first round. So,
yep.
Who else?
Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M, looks the part, and when he does everything correctly, I mean, he's 6'5", 280 with length. I mean, he has the NFL body. Landon Jackson from Arkansas. You don't come out down here to find a run defender. I don't think but I do believe that guy, Landon Jackson from Arkansas, can be a very stout edge setter against the run, and some teams are really looking for that next year in the draft. But as equally impressed as I was with that run defense, I was very unimpressed with his one-on-ones as a pass rusher. Just very stiff, hard to get his feet off the ground. So, he's going to be a mid-round type pick. Another name that did catch my attention that I was not expecting but I do like his college tape. I just kind of overlooked him because he's kind of average across the board, but he won over and over. And I think when I come down here, I look for guys that, in between plays, what are they doing? Are they conversing with coaches? Are they working on technique? Like, do they really want to work on their craft while they're down here? And that is Barron Sorrell from Texas. 6'4", just under 6'4", 253. That does not have great length, but in terms of technique and efficiency and playing with sharp angles and great footwork, he's a guy that stood out to me both in drills and in one-on-ones.
Okay, now let's flip it to the offensive line. As you said, a little bit more talent on that side last year, but still, you got some first round capable offensive linemen as usual this year in the draft, and we'll probably see some of them here this week. Who stuck out?
The name that stuck out the most was a guy that is moving from tackle to guard or center. It's a guy that played for North Dakota State, and it was Gray Zabel. This program continues to put out college tackles that move to the NFL and excel early in their careers inside. And he's going to be that guy this year, 6'5", 315, very short arms, just over 32 inches. But from his first snap in one-on-ones through his final and then carrying it over to the team drills, he didn't lose once. I mean, we're not talking about a guy that was playing well. He was dominant, and he's not even that big or that powerful. His technique, he just doesn't lose. I mean, he checks every box when you look for what to look for in an offensive line evaluation, every box is checked other than the fact that he just doesn't play with a lot of length. But he knows how to play. I was really impressed with his performance. Another small school guy that we should all keep an eye on, his name's Jackson Slater from Sacramento State. I did not have that on my bingo card to come down and watch a Sacramento State offensive lineman play really well against this stacked defensive tackle group. Really big and powerful, broad, and bends really well. He's the kind of guy that when you need an anchor inside, which that's a big deal for a lot of blockers coming out of college, they're just not strong enough to hold the point against NFL defensive tackles. He's a guy that just screwed himself to the ground, kept his hands in the right position, and just did not lose a snap in one-on-ones at all. Those were the two biggest winners that I had inside. Outside, I'm a little nervous about the group, and I would say this about the draft class, but the tackles in this draft and in this group up front, I'm a little nervous about. But there was one guy that did stand out, and he probably has the best body of all these guys, and it's Anthony Belton from NC State, 6'5", 345. Not the best athlete, and it's pretty obvious that he's not the best athlete, but that's okay. You don't have to be the best athlete to tackle. You just need to not abandon your technique. This guy trusts his size, trusts his length, had a really good day on the outside.
And let's also keep in mind that it's the first time they're going out there and practice. How many times do we see it in the Senior Bowl week where you have a good day one day and then all of a sudden the next day the opposite's happening, and players that weren't playing good the first day are playing good, and then vice versa. And I think that's not a surprise because, again, especially with some of the lower school kids or maybe some of the mid-major guys, because it's their first time out there. And maybe there's some guys, maybe they're just a little bit more nervous than other guys, or maybe they're being coached, which they are, and maybe they're picking up on some things, which they should, and then they're using that to their advantage in the next day. So it's still a very early process, and that's why it's kind of cool to get these daily reports. But that doesn't mean that when your final report comes out at the end of the week, that every single one of these players that you have been positive or negative about are going to stay positive or negative.
Yeah, that's thanks for putting it out there, because that is probably one of the most important components to Senior Bowl week. That there's a lot of overreactions, good in both directions on the week overall, but B, the first day. The most important days, in my opinion, for the Senior Bowl are tomorrow and Thursday, because do they bounce back from right now? Those guys are getting coached up. They're watching film with the coaches, and they say, hey, tomorrow you got to fix X, Y, Z. So if you come out and we see better performance tomorrow, that's actually a really good sign. I care more about that than what they did today. Quarterback Jalen Milroe, he looked terrible today. I mean, his balls were sailing all over the place. He was bouncing balls. He was airmailing guys. His footwork looks slow, methodic, but it seems like he's working on things right now. He was moving slower than every quarterback here, and we all know how fast he is in terms of post-snap footwork. But if we come out and we see a good day tomorrow, that's going to mean something to me. That's actually going to boost him up. But you know, those are really important things to keep in mind. This week is about how they compete, yes, and how they perform on the field, but how do they respond to NFL coaching? Because that is just as important as the physical evaluation of their skill sets.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot as we close this out. I'll ask this of you at the end of every update this week. You've already given us some passing and maybe failing grades. Again, we don't want to be too harsh on day one, but go ahead and give me your top passing grade overall
from the quarterbacks.
No. From let's just stick with the defensive. Let's stick with the offensive line, defensive line, since that's what we're zeroing in on today. Give me an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman that he's your player of the day. He's the guy that really impressed you the most that's
offensive line. I'm going to stick with Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. Really curious to see if he can go out and repeat that performance tomorrow. But that's the guy I really did think of all the linemen here, and we have some potential first rounders. I thought he looked the best of everyone. So that's a big deal coming from North Dakota State. And he's also moving positions, by the way. I mean, the fact that he's playing center for the first time and playing like this is really impressive. So that guy gets my vote. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm probably going to say I'm going to give it a tie, but I have to give a tiebreaker for the sake of the question. So I'm going to go with Donovan Izuruku from Boston College, just because of the amount he won a couple different ways. It was pure speed up the edge, it was redirect inside, and then he would long arm a bunch of guys pretty much every single time. He was the first one to get their hands on, and he's not. My initial interpretation on his body type and some of his college tape was that he wasn't a very strong guy, wasn't a very powerful defender. He played very strong today. So if that actually is in his arsenal, that kid is a first round pick.
All right. And again, we're not going to get too much into the ones who failed, because they really didn't fail. Right. They might have struggled a little bit. And hopefully we'll see some of those guys bounce back tomorrow. But it's always good to find out who exactly got off to the best of starts. And it looks like those particular gentlemen are going to be the ones that we're going to blast all over on the thumbnail, so everybody can see for themselves exactly who it is that Dave is pretty excited about after day 2 in the Senior Bowl, day 1 practicing. And so tomorrow, again, like you said, Dave, we know, like you said, it's a completely different day now. It's probably one of the important days. Is there anything different about the practice or anything? Do they do anything differently every day they're out there in practice, or is it the same routine and the same schedule?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same routine, but you do have new coaches every year, so they might play it. But it's a pretty set template in terms of, individuals, group, team, and then they do some fun competition stuff at the end.
Okay. So, and that's the way it should be anyway. It makes it a lot easier for everybody, including the players, to know, because you want to keep a schedule. And that really helps. Okay. Sounds great. And then, of course, don't forget to, we'll have links in the description so you can follow Dave on his X account. And I'm sure you're going to be able to communicate with everybody quickly that way. If you have questions, comments, just leave them in the description, in the comment section, of course, of this video. And again, Dave's going to be back for the next several days. Actually, you're going to be there through, are you going to stay there only until Thursday or Friday?
Yeah, I leave Thursday midday. So I have all day tomorrow. Then I'll have probably the first practice under my wings on Thursday morning. Okay,
so we'll get a report on Wednesday. We'll get a report on Thursday, and then you're going to wrap it all up, and we'll have a wrap-up of the Senior Bowl week at some point, of course, when it's all said and done, including the game on Saturday. And that'll give us a little bit more time to chew on everything. So, Dave, appreciate it. And again, the weather's supposed to be pretty good for the next several days as well.
Yep. Yeah, it looks like we're going to have a repeat of what we had today. So that's music to my ears.
Excellent. Sounds good. I'm sure to everybody as well. So for Dave Syvertsen, I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in here to the Ourlads Football Network, Ourlads Football YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.